Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel, where we tell the Jimi Hendrix story, like you've never heard it before. In this episode, which is part 1 of the series, we undertake the definitive review, commentary and postmodern deconstruction of the greatest album ever recorded, Electric Ladyland, by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. We are also proud to announce that the Belly Button Window catalog is now available to download or stream for a fee, plus the availability to view uncensored and extended episodes. All you need do is follow the links and visit our video shop. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances, and stunning photographs from the period. Electric Ladyland was the third and final studio album by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, released in October 1968. A double album, it was the only record from the Experience with production solely credited to Hendrix, and was the band's most commercially successful release, and its only #1 album. It was released by Reprise Records in the United States on October 16, 1968, and by Track Records in the UK 9 days later. By mid-November, it had reached #1 on the Billboard Top LPs chart, spending 2 weeks there, while in the UK it peaked at #6, where it spent 12 weeks on the British charts. Electric Ladyland is famous for including a cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower, which became the Experience's best-selling single, reaching #6 in the UK and #20 in the United States. Although the album confounded critics upon its release, it has since been viewed as one of Hendrix's best works, and one of the greatest albums of all time, being featured on various Greatest Albums lists, including Q's 2003 list of the 100 Greatest Albums, and Rolling Stone's 2020 list of the 500 Greatest Albums of all time, on which it was ranked 53rd. As bluesman Tom Atter observed, with Hendrix, the physical becomes a frame of reference for the quality of the extraordinary experience. Time and again, this is not only represented, but actually given to us in his music. Instrumental music becomes voices, voices become percussion, percussion becomes time, time becomes stretched and condensed, and the whole becomes a Proustian rush that is a remembrance of the future. A spiral in which every curve inspires and propels the next arc of itself forward, downward or outward. Jimi's third album, and greatest recorded achievement, Electric Ladyland, can be regarded as the culmination of Jimi's creative achievements. Certainly, it was the album he was most satisfied with, and over which he had the most control, although not as much as he would have wished, having made the following comments: "We mixed it, and produced it, and all this mess. But when it's time for them to press it, and quite naturally, they screwed it up, because they didn't know what we wanted. There's a 3D sound on there that you can't even appreciate because they didn't know how to cut it proper. They thought it was out of phase." The cover announces, produced and directed by Jimi Hendrix. Of course, this is not entirely fair to Chas Chandler, who produced Crosstown Traffic, Burning of the Midnight Lamp and All Along the Watchtower, and unquestionably as a body of work, Electric Ladyland can be regarded as the highest point of Jimi's creative achievements. The songs cover similar ground to previous work, from woman troubles to the fate of the planet, but although the themes are familiar, Jimi appears to be on a quest for personal meaning and possible redemption. Electric Ladyland presaged Jimi's attempt to withdraw from the rock and roll circus during 1969, while he tried to re-evaluate his position and consider his next moves. Thus, in constructing the album musically, Jimi shoots for definitive statements as if to draw a line under his music ready for the future. Incorporated into Electric Ladyland as discrete entities are virtually all genres of popular music: blues, soul, pop, R&B, jazz and funk, rock and roll and electronic. In particular, partnered by Eddie Kramer, Jimi took the exploration of symphonic possibilities of rock electronics further than anybody else, and with Voodoo Chile, he committed to vinyl, one of the finest interpretations of the Delta blues in modern times. Electric Ladyland also proved beyond any doubt that alongside all his other talents, Jimi wrote some of the best intros in the history of rock. The Experience began recording Electric Ladyland at several studios initially in the UK, followed by the United States, between July 1967 and January 1968, and after fulfilling touring commitments, resumed on April, until September of 1968, at the newly opened Record Plant Studios in New York City, with Chas Chandler as producer and engineers Eddie Kramer and Gary Kellgren. Hendrix was famous for his studio perfectionism, illustrated by the fact that he and drummer Mitch Mitchell recorded over 50 takes of Gypsy Eyes over 3 sessions. And surprisingly, Despite his already undisputed success, Hendrix was still insecure about his voice and recorded his vocals hidden behind studio screens, including when he sang backing vocals himself on the title track and on Long Hot Summer Night. As recording progressed, Chandler became frustrated with Hendrix's perfectionism and his demands for repeated takes. Seeing it as nothing more than studio self-indulgence, Hendrix allowed friends and guests to join them in the studio, which contributed to a chaotic and crowded environment in the control room and culminated in Chandler severing his professional relationship with Jimi. Bass player Noel Redding recalled, "There were tons of people in the studio, you couldn't move, it was a party, not a session." Redding, who had formed his own band, Fat Mattress, in mid-1968, found it increasingly difficult to fulfill his commitments with the experience, so Hendrix played many of the bass parts in Redding's absence. The double LP was the only Experience album mixed entirely in stereo, and sees Hendrix experiment with other combinations of musicians, including Jefferson Airplane's Jack Cassidy and Traffic's Steve Winwood, who played bass and organ respectively on the 15-minute slow blues jam Voodoo Child. Electric Ladyland was the third and final studio album by the Jimi Hendrix Experience, released in October 1968. A double album, it was the only record from the Experience with production solely credited to Hendrix, and was the band's most commercially successful release, and its only #1 album. It was released by Reprise Records in the United States on October 16, 1968, and by Track Records in the UK 9 days later. By mid-November, it had reached #1 on the Billboard Top LPs chart, spending 2 weeks there, while in the UK it peaked at #6, where it spent 12 weeks on the British charts. Electric Ladyland is famous for including a cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower, which became the Experience's best-selling single, reaching #6 in the UK and #20 in the United States. According to music journalist David Stubbs, Electric Ladyland is undoubtedly a rock album, albeit rock on the point of evolving into something else. Uncut Magazine's John Robinson said that its music reconciles the psychedelic pop of Hendrix's earlier recordings with the aggressive funk he would explore on his 1970 album Band of Gypsies. During its recording, Kramer experimented with innovative studio techniques such as backmasking, chorus effect, echo, and flanging, which AllMusic's Cub Coda said recontextualized Hendrix's psychedelic and funk sounds on the album. It was a hit psychedelic album, Richie Unterberger later wrote, and by mid-November, it had reached #1 in the US, spending 2 weeks atop the pop charts. Either way, Electric Ladyland is a cross-section of Hendrix's wide range of musical talent. It includes examples of several genres and styles of music: the psychedelic Burning of the Midnight Lamp, a UK single the previous summer, 1967, the extended blues jam Voodoo Child, the New Orleans-style R&B of Earl King's Come On, the epic studio production of 1983, A Merman I Should Turn to Be, the social commentary of House Burning Down, and the 60s-era Britpop of Noel Redding's Little Miss Strange. The album also features an electric reworking of the Bob Dylan classic All Along the Watchtower, which was well received by critics as well as by Dylan himself, and also Voodoo Child's Slight Return, a staple of both radio and guitar repertoire. Rolling Stone's Holly George Warren praised Crosstown Traffic for its hard rock guitar riff, while All Along the Watchtower became the band's top-selling single and their only US top 40 hit, peaking at #20 and reaching #5 in the UK. The album also included one of Hendrix's most prominent uses of a wah-wah pedal on Burning of the Midnight Lamp, which reached #18 in the UK charts. Originally, Hendrix had written to Reprise describing what he wanted for the cover art, but was mostly ignored. He expressly asked for a color photo by Linda Eastman, later McCartney, of the group sitting with children on the sculpture of Alice in Wonderland in Central Park, and drew a picture of it for reference. The company instead used a blurred red and yellow photo of his head while performing at Saville Theatre, taken by Carl Ferris. Track Records used its art department, which produced a cover image by photographer David Montgomery, who also shot the inside cover portrait of Hendrix, depicting 19 nude women lounging in front of a black background. Hendrix expressed initial displeasure and surprise with this naked lady cover, but later told Rolling Stone magazine that he dug it anyway, much as he was displeased with the Axis, bold as love cover, which he found disrespectful. The cover was banned by several record dealers as pornographic, while others sold it with the gatefold cover turned inside out, or in a brown wrapper. while Carl Ferris recounts Jimi calling it like a scene from one of his bad groupie orgies. Electric Ladyland confounded contemporary critics. Reviewers praised some of its songs, but felt the album lacked structure and sounded too dense. Melody Maker called it mixed up and muddled, with the exception of All Along the Watchtower, which the magazine called a masterpiece. Reviewing for Rolling Stone in 1968, Tony Glover said Hendrix's original songs sometimes sound unstructured and was somewhat disappointed by the heavy-handed guitar on 1983, A Merman I Should Turn to Be, and the science fiction conclusion to House Burning Down. Ultimately, Glover appreciated the energy flow unifying the songs and described Hendrix as amazing, adding that Electric Ladyland serves as an extended look into Hendrix's head, and mostly it seems to have some pretty good things in it. Who among us is totally free of mental garbage? Robert Christgau was more enthusiastic in Stereo Review, regarding it as an explosive showcase of rock's most important recent innovation, the heavy guitar aesthetic, and an integrated work in itself in more ways than one. He found the production exceptional. The best job of stereo for its own sake, I know, and was surprisingly impressed by the quality of the lyrics. While most guitarists in rock believed improvisation to be a straightforward endeavor, Christgau said, Hendrix achieves unique effects you'll never get from Kenny Burrell, citing Voodoo Chile as an example. He later named Electric Ladyland the fifth best album of 1968 in his ballot for Jazz and Pop magazine's critics poll. Over time, Electric Ladyland's critical standing improved significantly, with author and musicologist John Perry describing it as one of the greatest double albums in rock. According to author Michael Heatley, most critics agree that the album was the fullest realization of Jimi's far-reaching ambitions. Guitar World editor No Goldwasser called it his greatest work. The record was also deemed an essential hard rock album in Tom Larson's 2004 book, History of Rock and Roll, and Clash reviewer Robin Murray viewed it as a true classic of the psychedelic rock era. In a retrospective review for Blender, Christgau wrote that it was the definitive work of psychedelic music, describing the record as an oral utopia that accommodates both ingrained conflict and sweet, vague spiritual yearnings, held together by a master musician. In Charlotte Gregg's opinion, much like Are You Experienced, Electric Ladyland was groundbreaking, introducing audiences to a style of psychedelic rock rooted in the blues. The Washington Post critic Jeffrey Himes names it an exemplary release of the progressive soul development from 1968 to 1973. While author Amy Wallace called the album a classic of acid rock. Electric Ladyland has been featured on many greatest album lists, including a number 10, ranking on Classic Rock magazine's list of the 100 greatest rock albums ever, and number 37 on the Times 100 best albums of all time. Music journalist and author Peter Doggett argued that it is very likely the greatest rock album of all time because of its exceptional concept, artful melodies, experimentation, and skilled musicianship, which he felt remains unparalleled by any other rock artist. The album was included in a basic record library of 1950s and 1960s recordings, published in Christgau's record guide, Rock Albums of the 70s, 1981. In 1999, it was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, and in 2000, it was voted number 32 in Colin Larkin's all-time top 1,000 albums. In 2003, Q magazine named Electric Ladyland as one of the 100 greatest albums. Rolling Stone ranked it 54th in the 2003 edition of its 500 Greatest Albums of All Time publication, and 53rd in the 2020 edition. Author of Roomful of Mirrors, Charles R. Cross explains, Electric Ladyland had been such a difficult album, it had cost Jimi his producer, Chas Chandler. Though the record would later be generally accepted as Jimi's studio masterpiece, the contemporary reviews were mixed, with many critics challenging the length of the 16-song double album. Frank Kofsky in Jazz and Pop wondered whether it was absolutely essential that we be given a long and sometimes monotonous double album. Jimi felt the opposite, and said in interviews that he would have preferred a triple LP set. We really got about half of what we wanted to say in it, he explained. Most critics couldn't avoid calling Electric Ladyland a concept album, or contradictorily suggesting it didn't have a strong enough sense of cohesion. Hendrix is a good musician and his science fiction concepts surmount noise, Tony Glover wrote in the Rolling Stone review. There isn't really a concept, no Sgt. Pepper trips here. Instead, there's a unity, an energy flow. Glover went on to call the set an extended look into Hendrix's head. Hendrix, psychedelic superspade, or just a damn good musician and producer. Depends on whether you want to believe the image or your ears. It wasn't just in Rolling Stone where Jimi's race became part of the critical analysis. He was called a superspade in a number of magazines at the time. The East Village Other headlined their Electric Ladyland review, Hendrix, the Cassius Clay of pop. While critic Richard Goldstein called Jimi an Uncle Tom because he had attracted a largely white audience, even Ebony magazine couldn't avoid stereotypes when describing Jimi. In Repose, he looks like a cross between Bob Dylan and the Wild Man of Borneo. Their piece read, reprising the metaphor from the early British press. And the Gods Made Love opens the album, a fragment of a sound painting, utilizing the tape sounds of Jimi's own voice, a tympanum drum and snare rim shots. The resulting mix is slowed down, reversed, and finally replayed as repeating tape echo. In interviews, Mitch Mitchell labeled Electric Ladyland as a concept, a term much in vogue these days, without actually stating what the concept was. Jimi was more specific. Electric Ladyland was dedicated to groupies. Some people call them groupies, but I prefer the term electric ladies. My whole Electric Ladyland album is about them. So with Have You Ever Been to Electric Ladyland, Jimi, harmonizing falsetto with himself, takes us on another magical mystery tour in the spirit of Spanish castle magic and the stars that play with Laughing Sam's dice. The latest excursion, floating on a melodic cushion of chord patterns similar to Little Wing, visits the embrace of the electric ladies and their garden of delights. The fact is, these women were often the only people willing to listen to a musician bursting with frustration and anger, or burdened with loneliness or isolation after months on the road. Whether groupies or more steady girlfriends, Jimi rarely spoke to anyone else about how he was feeling. Like the early jazz singers, Jimi Scat sings in unison with his guitar for the intro into Crosstown Traffic, flipping us from space-time to boogie time. The jazz-related chordal progressions produce, according to Dave Whitehill, an accomplished transcriber of Jimi's music, a degree of harmonic sophistication almost unheard of in rock at that time. Lyrically, Crosstown Traffic is an R&B put down of women who in Jimi's terms are clingy, using a neat metaphor of the urban transport snarl up. And with Jimi playing up to the macho spade image, snarl is exactly the tone. Unlike many of the tracks on the album, this recording features the full lineup of the experience with Hendrix, Noel Redding, and Mitch Mitchell. Hendrix also plays a makeshift kazoo made with a comb and tissue paper in tandem at points with his lead guitar, and backing vocals are performed by Redding along with Dave Mason. With its hard rock riff, the song mixes elements of blues and acid rock. Billboard described the single as a pulsating swinger that will make a powerful chart dent. Cashbox described it as an explosive session with massive instrumental impact and a heavy vocal. Record World said that it shakes with excitement. But Electric Ladyland was not entirely concerned with groupies, or band-aids as Jimi called them. With Voodoo Child, Jimi brought the dark secret of the blues to the international stage, the bluesman's historic connections to the underground religion of slavery. Voodoo, a mixture of West African magico religion and Catholic ceremony, came to the West Indies with the slaves imported by the French. Within the black community, voodoo operated on two levels. Voodoo worship was an act of political defiance, which entailed a secret communication and belief system uniting a people in oppression. While at a more pragmatic level, it provided ordinary people with access to powerful accoutrements of sorcery, potions and charms which could be used for good or ill. But the bluesmen engaged in voodoo on yet another plane, the implications of which made them feared also. As the bluesman was a wayward spirit, a drifter down dusty highways, bound by nothing save an obsession with learning the secret of playing music that would strike deep in the soul of his audience. To achieve this, it was alleged, he sought divine intervention and made a pact with the devil. The sepulchral tones of Stevie Winwood's Hammond organ add gothic menace to a song brimful of the brooding, fascinating and haunting tensions inherent in this most supernatural of blues. Possession is the highest aim in voodoo ceremony, to the point where, rather than communing with God, the high priest becomes God. This is the central theme of the song, from a primordial soup of erotic power, ancient curse, gypsy prophecy, and intergalactic communion. Jimi manifests himself as the cosmic force who can travel in both the physical and psychic plane, through time and space. Although grounded and inspired by the Delta blues form, Jimi takes us through a history of the blues in its broadest sense. In Voodoo Child's Slight Return, Jimi carries on the images of unlimited power transcending the laws of nature. The long version of Voodoo Child in the studio, though it sounds as if performed live, is created by a select band of studio hangers-on. Actually, those crowd noises were dubbed on later. Jimi regularly featured Slight Return in concert, and it was up on the stage where a voodoo image of Jimi became most potent. When on good nights, he hoodooed his audience, guiding them through his music like the high priest guiding the adepts through the rituals and ceremonies. With his clothes, jewelry, feathers, hat and scarf, he looked like a high priest, and as he snaked his way across the stage, he danced like a high priest in the throes of serpent worship, the central deity of voodoo, symbol of life, fecundity, and wisdom. Voodoo Child evolved from Catfish Blues, a song that Hendrix performed regularly during 1967 and early 1968. Catfish Blues was a homage to Muddy Waters, made up of a medley of verses based on Waters' songs, including Rollin' Stone, Still a Fool, and Rollin' and Tumblin'. In April 1968, Hendrix recorded a number of solo demos in a New York hotel, including an early Voodoo Child, which he had been developing for some time. It used elements of Catfish Blues, with new lyrics by Hendrix, and included a vocal and guitar unison line. Music critic Charles Shaar Murray describes Voodoo Child as virtually a chronological guided tour of blues styles, ranging from early Delta blues through the electric blues of Muddy Waters and John Lee Hooker, to the more sophisticated style of B.B. King and the cosmic blurt of John Coltrane. Lyrically, he adds, the song is part of a long line of supernatural brag songs. Hendrix's song opens with, well, the night I was born, Lord, I swear the moon turned a fire red, twice. Well, my poor mother cried out, Lord, the gypsy was right, and I seed her fell down right dead, hoochie coochie man. The Muddy Waters Willie Dixon blues classic opens. The gypsy woman told my mother, before I was born, you got a boy child coming, go and be a son of a gun. In later verses, Hendrix, a fan of science fiction, adds references to the outskirts of infinity and Jupiter's sulfur mines. Music writer John Perry said of the concept behind the song that it blends two of Jimi's great loves, Chicago blues and science fiction, interstellar hoochie coochie. The child in the title and lyrics is a phonetical approximation of child, pronounced without the D, a spelling that was also used for Hendrix's song Highway Child. During the Electric Ladyland recording sessions at the record plant, Hendrix and the band often jammed with other performers at New York City clubs. After one such jam at the nearby Scene Club on May 2nd, 1968, Hendrix brought a group of about 20 people to the studio. This practice of inviting large groups to the studio led Noel Redding to storm out of the record plant earlier that evening, and he was not present during the recording of Voodoo Child. Organist Steve Winwood from Traffic, bassist Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane, and jazz guitarist Larry Coryell were among those present. Although Coryell was invited to play, he declined, and Hendrix proceeded to record Voodoo Child with Mitchell, Winwood, and Cassidy. The remainder were on hand to provide the ambient crowd noise. Winwood recalled, there were no chord sheets, no nothing. Hendrix just started playing. It was a one-take job, with him singing and playing at the same time. He just had such mastery of the instrument, and he knew what he was and knew his abilities. Despite the appearance of spontaneity, engineer Eddie Kramer said that such sessions were not informal. Jimi plotted and planned out nearly all of them. He'd reasoned that if he had his songs together, if he really wanted to pull out what he heard in his head, he needed the right people, and that's what he did. During the recording session, Hendrix is heard advising Winwood on his organ part. Recording began about 7:30 a.m. and 3 takes were recorded, according to biographer John McDermott and Kramer. During the first take, Hendrix showed the others the song while the recording equipment was adjusted. During the second take, Hendrix broke a string. These 2 takes were later edited together and released as Voodoo Child Blues on the posthumous Hendrix compilation album Blues. The third take provided the master that was used on Electric Ladyland. Music writer John Perry claims there were at least 6 takes recorded, but several were incomplete. Voodoo Child opens with a series of hammer-on notes, similar to Albert Collins' intro to his Collins Shuffle. Hendrix played through a Fender Bassman top, providing a very warm amp sound with his guitar tuned down a whole tone. Although Hendrix's vocal and guitar are featured, the other musicians make contributions. taking it beyond the blues. McDermott describes Winwood's mid-song organ part as a very English, hornpipe-like dance that was very traffic-like. However, Perry calls it a modal raga-like phrase, which Hendrix responds to by improvising a mixed blues and eastern scale. Mitchell anticipates changes in direction, and Cassidy provides a pulsing, solid foundation. At 15 minutes, it is Hendrix's longest studio recording. Hendrix wanted to create the atmosphere of an informal club jam, but the recording did not capture sufficient background noise, so the onlookers provided additional crowd sounds, which were recorded from 9 a.m. to 9:45 a.m. Hendrix and Eddie Kramer later mixed the track, adding tape delay and other treatments. Although many live recordings of Voodoo Child's Slight Return have been issued, only the 3 takes of the original studio jam, Voodoo Child, are known to exist. That concludes this installment of the Electric Ladyland special. Stay tuned for part 2 of these series. Just a reminder that the Belly Button window catalogue is now available to download or stream for a fee, plus the availability to view uncensored and extended episodes. All you need do is follow the links and visit our video shop. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any stories or anecdotes to contribute, we would love to hear from you. Until next time.